Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York City. And as every week, we welcome the chance to visit with you as we explore progressive alternatives and narratives to our economically, politically, intellectually, and spiritually troubled country and world. One of our dear friends on this show is the psychiatrist Dr. James Gilligan, the lead author of the 2013 Rikers Island Report, which helped transform the narrative in this city about mass incarceration. In his forthcoming book, Toward a New Theory of Personality, he explores the potential for violence as the constant companion of prejudice. He argues that modern ideologies as nationalism, totalitarianism, and fundamentalism are not usually thought of as varieties of prejudice or new forms of it. And yet, not only are they just that, but they also predispose people to new and unprecedented forms of violence. For example, nationalism, which was invented in Western Europe and North America in the late 18th century, can be seen as a form of prejudice that privileges members of one's own nation and discredits those who belong to others. The only good Indian is a dead Indian. Exterminate all the brutes. Gilligan argues that these sentiments, the mottos of European imperialism and colonialism, in America and Africa, respectfully, were also the first harbingers of a new and unprecedented variety of an ancient form of violence, genocide. I'm so pleased to welcome back to the show two other friends and comrades of this show who have just returned from the important battles and struggles of the Standing Rock Sioux and other tribal nations in North Dakota. They're here to offer us their insight and passion to their experiences. So welcome to the Radical Imagination, Ajamu Baraka, the 2016 Green Party candidate for vice president, and we are waiting for Immortal Technique. He's been delayed. Felipe Coronel, the country's leading political rap artist as well, president of Viper Records, will be on our show at a later point as well today. So again, thank you for being here. Welcome.
It's my pleasure to join you once again in this very, very important conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm so glad we were able to have you on. And please just dive in there and tell us about your experiences. Give us a little bit of a historical background to this struggle so our audience really has a grasp on what's happening out there.
Well, as many of your listeners are probably aware, there is this attempt to construct a pipeline that's going to traverse 4 states, moving oil from a gas pipeline, moving through territories that are historically claimed by indigenous people as being part of their sacred and ancestral lands. So the pipeline that is being constructed through North Dakota actually is that construction is the closest to what is legitimately seen as a claim on the part of the Standing Rock Sioux to their land, and they claim that construction is going to threaten the water sources, both for themselves and for people downstream. Something like 17 million people who pull their water directly from the Missouri River. And so they have mobilized themselves in order to oppose that construction. They say that it's going to have a negative impact on their ability to survive. And so they have mobilized to stop the construction. They have gone to court to pursue the legal tracks. But the result has been that the court has sided with the company, and that the mobilizations have resulted in massive repression from the state and local authorities. So the Green Party, myself and Dr. Stein, we were invited to come to the encampment to see what was going on directly and to be in solidarity with the people and that struggle. And we responded and we went up there. In the process of being invited to the front line where the actual confrontation was taking place, we went, invited by of course, the Sioux people.
Mm-hmm.
And we expressed our solidarity, stood shoulder to shoulder with the people. And we discovered once we left a day or two later that there was an arrest warrant for Dr. Stein first and then myself, charging us with criminal trespassing and with vandalism. So that is what impacts us directly, personally. Politically, there was a partial victory, as people characterize it, and when the Obama administration intervened and said that there was going to be that they wanted the Army Corps of Engineers to take a second look at this process, and that there would be a pause in the construction. However, yesterday we saw that with the was that yesterday? Today, because I'm losing track of time because I've been out here.
We're taping on Wednesday here. So
Okay.
when did you get back? You got back a couple days ago, or?
I got back last week. I actually got
Okay.
back. But
All right.
the massive national protest took place a day or two ago.
Right.
And the response from the authorities in North Dakota was that they arrested a number of people.
Right.
And that it's clear that the state and the national authorities are still committed to making sure that this pipeline is in fact constructed.
So the struggle continues, obviously, and as you
Yes.
say, there was a partial sort of temporary victory in a sense. I find it incredibly interesting that they would invite you. They trusted you, right? You are the political group that they feel can understand the situation out there. And now you got, what did you painted something on was it a truck or something? What was it you painted on? Because it's tied into the opening that I had for the show here.
Well, the indigenous folks lay claim to a number of the machines that were on their land.
Right.
And they attached themselves, they locked themselves down to the machines. And when we were there, they asked us to express solidarity with them by leaving a message. And so we left messages. I wrote a message that said that we need authentic decolonization.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Stein said that she basically approved of this message. And so as a consequence of leaving those messages on those excavators, that was the basis for the vandalism charge.
Okay, so you're making a very, very profound political connection and linkage there. Just let's get into a little deeper, because I think it's an important connection. Tell us, why did you choose to put it in the way that you put it? Why do you think it was so important to phrase it in the way you phrased it?
I think that what people in this country need to be made aware of, they need to
Right.
be reminded of, or made aware of, because many people don't know,
Right.
is that the colonization, the attempted extermination of the indigenous people, is not something that is confined to the history books. And that's something that happened in the past. And we can go back and we can study it and we could lament what happened to these indigenous people. No, that process continues. The relationship between indigenous nations and the U.S. state is a process of a colonial relationship. And that process and that relationship continues. So the very fact, for example, that we could be invited by the Sioux to come to their ancestral lands, but then get a charge of trespassing
Right.
thrust on us by the state demonstrates the contradiction. That here are the lands of the Sioux,
Right.
the original stewards of this land, and here you have the colonial authorities who then say that us being on that land constitutes trespassing because they have
Farcical.
laid claim.
It's a farcical irony. Yeah, it's incredible.
Exactly, it's very,
Right.
and then many people missing that relationship. So,
That's why
you
this
know,
is so important to get out. Yeah.
exactly, and that's why I say that we need authentic decolonization because that process of injustice, that process of not recognizing the sovereignty and the self-determination of indigenous people, that process of the colonial state still imposing its will and its laws on indigenous people is something that people need to be made aware of, and for us in our campaign, for us to stand in solidarity against.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, another connection you made there in your statement was the water and land of the indigenous peoples being harmed and poisoned and so on. Possibility of it would also affect. I think you said what 17 million people downstream from the Missouri River there. So. Again, it's important to realize that it's not just a few people here, indigenous people, that we somehow consider the other and just do not consider fully participants in our political process. But it is great numbers of people who will suffer also as a result, non-indigenous people, if you will, correct?
Exactly, because these pipelines have a history of leaking, of breaking. And so the concern on the part of the indigenous people, the people who are water protectors, and specifically the women who are the main protectors of the water, is that this pipeline is a threat to their water source themselves directly, but also to the water of everyone in that territory. So, this is the basis of their opposition. And they are adamant about that. And as a consequence of their stance, something quite interesting has happened among the indigenous. And that is that they are claiming that for the first time in more than 100 years, they've had a process of unity in which 180 various peoples and nations have come together
That's
in
incredible.
solidarity opposing this pipeline. I mean, so the scenes that we were able to witness at the base camp were incredible. All of these various peoples coming together and making their entry into the camp. Everyone joining in their ceremonial expressions, the statements of solidarity, the tears that were shed as a result of seeing this kind of unity being developed. This was an incredible, and is still an incredible development, and it's something that clearly suggests that there's going to be more intense struggles around these kinds of attempts by the state to violate the rights of indigenous people, to engage in these extractive industries that are stealing the resources from indigenous people, violating their territory sovereignty, undermining their natural environments. So that's going to be an escalation of these kinds of struggles, and that is a good thing.
Well, Ajamu, as you were speaking, we are blessed to have Immortal Technique, Felipe Coronel, to join us and to bear witness as well to what you are expressing here. Felipe was also out in North Dakota, so I'm so glad that you could make it. I knew he would, and to share your insights as well and experiences out in North Dakota with your brother.
Well, as my colleague was pointing out, first of all, thank you very much for your words and your solidarity. There is definitely a resurgence of unity, but also an understanding of tactics that have been used in the past. The false illusion of a victory being sold in the press is really something that we need to be aware of and be conscious that is a tool that is sometimes used to try and displace people or make them think that the threat is over. Also, another thing to consider is that when we started discussing the long-term ramifications of this, it's not just the indigenous people that are going to be the victims of that. There's 18 million people that depend on the drinking water from the Missouri River.
Right.
And I think that once that became evident to a lot more individuals, then the priorities of many more people began to align themselves with the water protectors and with others. They
And that
began to say-
expands the movement.
Right,
And
but
people
there-
see the
But there's a
connections.
certain hypocrisy attached to it, because when they
Tell
didn't
us.
think that it affected them,
Right.
then people were willing to look by the wayside. They were willing to pass the buck along. But as soon as it became evident that they would also be affected, that their homes would be receiving contaminated water as well. And the other thing to consider here is that I visited the area a long time ago, and I met with a longtime activist and revolutionary Russell Means. And his words were very piercing. He told me that on the reservation, that there are typically only half the tests, if that, for toxins for the drinking water than the federal government forces the state to make. So if you can imagine what happened in Flint, Michigan, it would be worse out there, because the people would get less warning. They would be more susceptible to the toxins in the water because they would be exposed to them for longer.
Right.
And that's something that's never really talked about, the inequality of that. But what I think is the silver lining, if there is one in this situation, is that sense of camaraderie, that sense of unity. And also the fact that finally you have people from the left, or the so-called left, that are finally saying, okay, if we're really going to talk about the environment, then that means that we have to fight against these large corporations together, that we have to truly be committed to the cause and say, look, we're going to burn some bridges here. Matter of fact, we might have to burn some bridges, drain the river, and build apartments, because these individuals aren't going to stop. Their charge to deplete the resources of this world are relentless, because they see them as a monetary gain rather than looking at them as what they are, which are an irreplaceable part of our ecosystem. You know, the earth doesn't belong to us. We belong to the earth. That was a sentiment that was echoed by everybody there. And the other thing I'll say is that, you know, I and others didn't go there to lead the struggle. We went there to follow the directives and the requests of the people that were there. So I think that that's another important thing to tell people that want to support. You know, we aren't trying to co-opt any movement whatsoever. You know what I mean?
Ajamu made that
Right.
clear
and
as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And I appreciate his sentiment about that, and his expressing that openly. We're simply there to support those people in their struggle, and to show camaraderie, and to say, hey, if this is the case here, then certainly we can imagine how little they care about the environment in other parts of the world where they
Absolutely.
can't have that kind of press coverage. You know, already people are having their IDs pulled, people are being arrested based off video evidence that they're doing. So there is a witch hunt going on for the people who the government alleges are leaders of the movement, without actually having any corroborating evidence. And I think that what's important is that we rally even more around that. You know, it's like an old story about the sun and the clouds, right? Let's take a minute to tell. The sun and the clouds were having an argument, and they saw a little man coming by, and they said, I'm stronger. No, I'm stronger. And the cloud said, you know what, I'm going to show you how strong I am. And he blew the wind as hard as he could on the man that was walking by. And instead of retreating, the man held on to his hat and his coat even harder. So the clouds blew even harder, ripped up trees, everything, and the man held on by the seat of his pants, the edge of his life. And finally, he ran out of breath, and the sun came out. And instead, the sun smiled at the man. The man said, man, it's getting hot. And the sun smiled even more. The man said, ooh, took off his hat. And the sun came out fully, and the man was forced to take off his coat and walk through with just his shirt on. The moral of the story is that if we feel like we can force a situation, you know, then we may end up acting like the clouds instead of shining on our own people. The premise is that we have to love our own people more than we hate our oppressor. It takes no energy to to sit back and to criticize and to demonize people, right? It takes a lot of energy to actually go out there and put the work in and stand side by side with individuals. So I'm not even angry anymore at the people that I see on the internet that are saying ignorant things about this. I just feel like they're being purposefully kept ignorant about what's going on. You know, I was even approached by a guy after one of the rallies, you know, a neo-Nazi guy yelled something at me out of the car. And this poor bastard didn't realize that his drinking water is going to be affected. You know, he doesn't even realize that he's the one getting poisoned by these people too. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form, you know, saying that you can't have anger or rage or what it is, but we have to keep a focused direction on and to back those people up with what they want to do.
And so do you see a role too with the Green Party and Jill and Ajamu in their struggles? I want to bring Ajamu back in on that
to say
reaction to what Tech has been saying.
Sure, to say the least. I mean, look, you have the leftist elements of the Democratic Party putting incredible pressure on the president and everybody else behind closed doors. That got us what people see as a temporary victory, but also what a lot of people see as a potential distraction. We're not going to take simply a symbolic victory. We appreciate that, but from what I understand and what I was told by the elders there, they will continue to fight up until they no longer feel the threat to their environment. And that's a lifelong fight. That's not something that's going to end there, because I'm sure the buck will be passed along further to other people who they feel like they can just go and take advantage of. You know, I mean, they say that a closed mouth doesn't get fed. You know, if people don't protest and make their voices heard, then how are we going to know what they're suffering? You know, they want us to suffer quietly. They want to give people money under the table. They want to bribe people. They want to intimidate them with PMCs and with dogs. And when that doesn't work, they spread disinformation and false rumors of victory, you know.
How would you respond to that, Ajamu?
Well, there's really no response. I think our dear brother laid it out just the way it is. That you know, the kind of struggle that we see, the ongoing struggle there is something that's been an inspiration for most of us, all of us really. And the potential that we see established now as a consequence of our solidarity, the solidarity between indigenous people and African people in this country, or African Americans, however you want to claim us or characterize us, is even more deeper with the kinds of solidarities that people have expressed. The physical going to that struggle has been something that we can really continue to build on. So, and I feel good about the role that we played. Like our dear brother said, we went up there not for a photo op, but to be in solidarity. We hope and we think that as a consequence of their clumsy response to our presence, that helped to bring some additional attention to what was happening with that struggle, because we know that the corporate media was in fact involved in a whiteout of that struggle. So, you know, we have to remind people that this is, see, you know, on one level, it's going to be a victory regardless, because the fact that there was this resistance, this struggle that took place, is a resistance, is a victory for the people. And we understand the trickery, and we understand that the objective of the strategy of the state is to demobilize and to confuse. But we saw just the other day with the repression up there that this pause in the construction of the pipe was merely just a diversion. That basically they are still committed to the construction of this pipe, and they are prepared to do whatever they need to do in order for that to take place. So we have to get the word out that this struggle continues, and that it is a people struggle, it is a righteous struggle, and that all of us who experience the sting and the reality of oppression, who understand that this struggle against this settler state continues, we will continue to stand in solidarity and put our bodies on the line to make sure that we, in fact, are going to come out of this with a real victory.
So as you go on with your campaign, how are you bringing this argument, these linkages, to the other people that you are reaching out to support you in this country?
Well, we understand that basically this campaign is not about just Jill and Ajamu Baraka, but this is a campaign about how we build alternative power, how we build dual power here in this country. And so this campaign is part of a broader strategy to, in fact, do that. So what that says is that we have to make these links, and we're making these links. I mean, I had the honor to hang out on the streets of Baltimore last night with the homeless, and the objective there was to bring attention to the kinds of policies of criminalization that's being directed at homeless people in Baltimore and really across this country. And we are making that connection. We are exposing what is happening under various Democrat administrations and unfortunately Black Democrat administrations across this country, criminalizing the homeless, not respecting their humanity, destroying their properties. And our message is constant, that basically we're not going to be able to address the issue of homelessness. We're not going to be able to address the issues that impact poor and working class people in this country without a political fight. And that, if people understand that, then they understand what their historic responsibility and the potential power might be. So we're making those links. This is about building social movement. We understand we're in a protracted struggle for the kind of radical social change that we have to bring about here in this country.
So it's a political struggle too, right?
Speaking of history, as the brother brought up, I was reminding a friend of mine, we were having a political discussion on a bus, and I said, in the USSR, people think they never voted. They voted. They just voted for one person every year. Oh yeah, we're all voting. The only person on the bill was Khrushchev or Brezhnev or someone else. And we think we're free because we vote for two people? That doesn't make any sense. And it makes absolutely no sense to people who think logically. So I feel now more than ever, people are looking for other options. They are looking for a third party. That's become part of the national conversation in the political lexicon of America's long, tragic story when dealing with corruption. But there's a famous saying that says, corruption, once exposed, has no refuge but audacity. In other words, imagine if I stole from you and you say, you stole. I said, I never took anything from you. How dare you accuse me, Jim? How dare you call me a thief? And then you show me a hidden camera that says you stole. And I say, well, you got too much stuff anyway.
Yeah, phony baloney camera.
That's exactly what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with corrupt institutions.
Distortions, lies,
that have
repressions,
routinely also expected our vote, taken us for granted. And we have never pressured that establishment in the same way. I feel like having a third party, even in the national conversation, but now it's become much more than a conversation. It's become a reality, so much so that the left wing of the Democratic Party is now pulling away from the Democratic Party and saying this is the same type of corporate crony capitalism that we see being again and again depicted as being part of the foundation of what conservative Republicans have become, because they also had a shift in their policy. I remember reading their writings from the 1800s, and they were the people that called the Emancipation Proclamation a sham, because they say, how can you tell people that they are equal under the eyes of the law and representation, but their culture isn't equal? It doesn't go far enough. Or this illegal war with Mexico that we're having. If we end up knocking over republics that are smaller than us, we planted the seeds of despotism at our own door. So when we look at these political parties that have switched their allegiance on human rights issues so many times, it gives us pause. And we say, who are the people that have been the most consistent? Who are the people that are willing to take an inward look at themselves and say, all right, fine, we have to have a serious conversation about diversifying the party, not just in terms of a figurehead, but also in terms of the grassroots that are involved. We have to be fearless in terms of going into these low-income inner city communities and rural low-income communities and explaining to people the very painstaking reality that those individuals that have proclaimed themselves their saviors over the years it hasn't really added up on paper. And now, more than ever, I feel like America is ready to look at a third-party candidate with some kind of seriousness.
So you don't think that Hillary, once she's recovered from her pneumonia, is going to be going to the streets of Baltimore or to North Dakota anytime soon? Is that
I've
part
always,
of the campaign agenda?
I've always told people that when they asked me about Hillary and Trump, I always said that I felt like he was a caricature who was only there to make us feel better about the inevitability of her looming presidency, as if she's already won it, you know? And I think that part of it, that entitlement that people feel, encapsulates the sort of imperialism that is continuously spread around the world. And as soon as I say imperialism, I know that there are people out there in the TV world who roll their eyes and say, oh, that can't still be going on. Well, actually it is. You know, when you still want regime change, when you have the president who continues the Bush doctrine, right? And sometimes people get offended. How can you say that Obama continued the Bush doctrine? And I say, well, if he didn't, then what would he be doing differently? During that time, the Bush doctrine was to knock over Middle Eastern states that didn't agree with American policy or didn't fall in line. After Bush came out of office, you know, Obama went around doing what? Under his reign, they had the phony Arab Spring, which was really a regime change in Tunisia, which was really a regime change in Libya, which was a fresh new dictator in Egypt, and also the destabilization and the destruction of Syria, because we supported radical elements of Islamic militants in the region. So I guess radical Islam is a horrible thing when, you know, it blows over in an urban environment in France or America, but it's just fine when we're paying other people to do that dirty work in other countries, which is why I feel like it's necessary to have these discussions. And the Green Party and the Libertarians are the only people who are actually willing to have those discussions, and it's no wonder that they're being locked out of the debates.
Exactly.
Want to follow up on that, Ajamu?
That analysis is exactly the analysis that we have to try to create among most progressives and real leftists here in the United States of America. And that is, in fact, why we are being locked out of the debate, because they don't want that kind of analysis, that kind of perspective to be exposed to the American people. If we have a chance to stand shoulder to shoulder, that is Jill Stein with Trump and Hillary Clinton, and myself with Tom Kaine and Mike Pence, I think that people in this country are going to see a real contrast in perspectives and values and worldviews. And I think that while some people might not be ready for some of the analysis, there are millions of people who will be and are prepared for real change at this point. So yes, 2016 is a turning point. You know, because I think people understand in their gut that this system cannot be reformed. That has to be a radical understanding that we have to transcend this system. They understand that the strategy of permanent war in order to advance the interests of the 1% is not working for them, because we are the ones to suffer as a consequence. All we need to do is be able to get those messages to the people. And to remind people that basically they have the power. They have the power through organization, through vision, to in fact transform their conditions and transform this world. So that is the political line. That's what we are struggling for. You know, the only cautionary note that I would say is that, you know, while the libertarians have a degree of attention and some support, we understand that objectively they don't have anything this different outside of their critique of U.S. foreign policy. That is, that their commitment to unfettered capitalism is something that we also have to critique, because basically it is capitalism that got us where we are today. And so we have to have a critical response, a critical analysis of capital and capitalism, and not be afraid to use these terms. Is important that we talk about imperialism. We have to deal with the people in this country as adults, and that's why I take the line that I don't pander. I'm not pandering to the people, and basically I'm saying, look, you know, we've got to deal with imperialism, we've got to deal with capitalism, we've got to deal with the fact that if we're really going to address the issues that face the vast majority of the people in this country, we've got to put back on the agenda real revolutionary change.
I think what's interesting about what the brother just brought up is that we hear time and time and again from the right wing about how communism has failed around the world, right? And the reality is that when there is a communist regime that becomes a failed state, we continuously blame it on the economic system, right? Mm-hmm. However, there have been many, many puppet democracies and quasi-real democracies over the entire planet that have failed. And it's continuously been the regime and not the economic system, even though time and time again, we've seen how much the economic system was a partner in that failure. And I think one thing that we need to come to terms with as a nation is that if you wanted an example, a living example of how capitalism has failed, you have no further to look than the United States of America. I mean, don't you remember when the country was bankrupt a few years ago, when it was about to go under, when the banks basically extorted money out of the federal government? I mean, when you look at that and you don't connect the dots about what has happened over the years, then you don't realize how many times it has come to fruition as a failed system. But time and time again, capitalism is like the dead body from that movie, Weekend at Bernie's. They just prop it back up. Oh yeah, this dead machine that we have, this outdated process of ripping minerals out of the ground in other countries and paying people a pittance so they can come here, that gives us pause to also ask a fundamental question that we need, and why haven't we yet addressed the Achilles heel of the left? And I keep saying it again and again. If all we want is a bigger slice of the pie, then we're missing a bigger question. Who made that pie? Who was on a conveyor belt for 18 hours cooking that pie? Who's cooked in that pie? And if we really are about workers' rights, then is it just about workers in America? Or are we building a worldwide community of workers? Is it okay for other people to be exploited in other countries just because we aren't? Aren't they human beings too? Just because they don't speak a Germanic-based language the same way we do, somehow their lives are considered less than ours, you know? And if that is what we function as, then aren't we now becoming the inheritors of that old Republican prophecy of planting the seeds of despotism at our own door as leftists?
That's a terrific point. And Ajamu, too, also what Tech is bringing out here, it's the international struggle, the international nature of all of this. Tell us about some of those connections that you and Jill might be having as well around the world to the struggle.
Well, you know, one of the major values and positions of this campaign is that we have to use the enormous power of the state to engage in what Joe Stein calls a peace offensive in the Middle East, for example. Mm-hmm. I would go even further and say that one of the things we have to do is to disengage or to disrupt the continuity and strategy that our dear brother referred to earlier, that was created at the end of the 1990s, the national security strategy that was committed to this notion of full spectrum dominance, that obligated the U.S. to attempt to undermine any regional power that might threaten its global hegemony. So we have to address that, because we see with the pivot to China, with the isolation of Russia, that this dangerous strategy is leading us closer and closer to a real possibility of a third world war. And so we have to educate people to be opposed to that. So, you know, we are committed to using the state to disengage from these endeavors, which means basically we're talking about using the state to begin to confront the interest that the state has always been committed to upholding. That is the interest of this 1%, this transnational elite based here in the U.S., what is worldwide tentacle. So, you know, we understand that that's why we say that this arrival at the White House is not the beginning point, but it's not the end point, but the beginning point. That we have to have real people's power in order to bring about the changes we have to bring about. that nominal control of the executive is not enough. So we have to revamp the entire foreign policy approach. We know that that's not going to take place very easily because we have the reality of a deep state that when it feels itself threatened, they have responded aggressively, even eliminating the heads of the executive branch. But that is what is going to take here in this country for us to really bring about real change. This state and the interest that it upholds has to be altered.
You're still talking about the struggle, in part at least, electorally, right? Voting.
That's part of
it?
a strategy. It's part of building alternative power.
Right.
But we understand that there's been very few, really any examples of people liberating themselves through voting.
Yeah, that's a problem, right?
I mean, look, over the years, we've traditionally seen that in order to find success, that you have to get, as my friend used to tell me, to a square that's not on the chessboard. You have to seek unconventional means because it doesn't matter if you're right. They're never going to admit that you're right. It's never going to be like, oh, okay, well, you're right. This company is polluting the ground, so that we're going to outlaw this company, or we're going to outlaw this practice because it's old and it's outdated anyway. No, we're going to continue to rip coal out of the ground to ruin the environment because we can create jobs. Jobs to do what? I think that there's never been also a national conversation about what the future job market in America is going to look like if we actually expect to have some kind of contingency of self-supplying green energy.
Right.
I think that it's sad that we don't have more of these type of conversations within the political structure of America, or even brought up. And I think that we can correlate that directly to how much the energy companies give in terms of monetary payments. I remind people, look, I was born in Peru, which is people look at as a third world country, where if you're stopped by the cops, you sometimes people would put like money in there and they would leave you alone. People look at that as corruption. You could see the same thing in West Africa or in Asia or anywhere around the world. However, here in New York City, I've never seen someone that hands a PBA card along with their license get a ticket, right? You give money to a person in a country like, let's say, I don't know, Nigeria, a bag of money, and people would look, oh, that's so corrupt. Whereas here in this country, you don't give them a bag of money. You give them millions of dollars through a lobbyist to get what you want done. How is that corruption any different? I think without that self-awareness and that self-understanding
to the correctional union, to the police
type
union
of corruption that exists in this country, and without addressing that, I mean, Senator Sanders, for all his faults, wanted to get money out of the system. You know what I mean? I think that the position of the Green Party to try and move as much of that money in big business out of politics as well was an idea that was popular before the senator had picked it up, before he brought it into the national conversation. So I think that the Green Party has a very good chance to stand on its record here, to say, no, we've always been opposed to these things. You can see over the years how we've consistently rejected the ideas of taking money from these large corporations, of being influenced by them, because there is obviously a connection in between taking millions of dollars from someone and having to expect them to do something for you. That's the nature of these politics. You know, when Monsanto and its parent companies or subsidiaries were donating to the Democratic Party, it's no secret that Obama signed the Monsanto Act, which prevents GMO foods from being labeled as such to actually pass through. I mean, that's where we are. Doesn't matter if we're left or right. Someone is up there paying lots of money to fulfill their business interests over the health care interests and the livelihood of the American public. I think when they become exposed to that, people's first reaction is anger. What I advise those people who get angry about that is your first reaction shouldn't just be anger. It should be contemplation that leads you towards action, towards saying, you know what, we have to divest from these particular companies. We're going to divest from, we're going to put pressure on these institutions monetarily. Obviously, the brother's right. Voting is just one tool in the arsenal. But if the only tool that you have is a hammer, then every problem starts looking like a nail. And every problem isn't a nail. that has to be handled very, very differently. And we should be open to all different types of strategies.
And you're a living embodiment of that. I mean, in the corporate music world, right? You've
Well,
established your own company.
A long time
right?
ago,
And
I told people that independence was
Right.
what gave me the ability
Your
to
integrity and
continuously say whatever I wanted to on a record.
Right.
There's no one that comes and sits over my shoulder and checks my homework and say, oh, well, you can't say that or you can't do this, because ultimately I'm expressing my freedom of speech with the ability to talk about these things.
just
Now,
like this show, by the way.
well, yes. If somebody would like to debate that, well, they're welcome to find me. And if, as long as they keep it respectful and it's non-threatening, then I'm willing to engage in that. I think that what we see in terms of the building back up of the Green Party is that it's not just going to be voting in one presidential election. You know,
Right.
I've always said, voting 25 times every century doesn't create a democracy. You know, I
Right.
think what I like about what I see from the Green Party is that over the years they focused a lot on local elections, on getting local people elected that affect change on the ground immediately with the policy, that affect environmental issues immediately on the ground with the policy. And I think that, if we can raise the national conversation enough to get the matching funds, or even if we offer the Democrats a Pyrrhic victory, then at some point we've built that infrastructure over the years that we can do a full court press coming up in the next
Coming
4
up,
years for a lot more of those local offices. Mayors, state senators, councilmen, congressmen perhaps, which would be able to carry these things to the floor. And in contrast to what we see as the corporate left on the Democrats,
Right.
say, okay, this is the actual policies that you claim you represent. And this other glass full of ink water, this is what you actually do with the world. Now, for once, you're going to have to decide what you want to be, what you claim to be, or what you actually are. But now that everybody gets to see you in that light, you have to own that. It's time for you to stop wearing this mask as if you truly represent those progressive or those revolutionary or those liberal ideals. Because unfortunately, I feel like too many of these individuals practice what we refer to as salad bar progressiveness, right? They want to talk about freedom of speech issues, which is totally legitimate. Gay rights issues, totally legitimate. But as soon as we get to something that conflicts with their money in terms of the environment, or as soon as we talk about something like Palestine, which requires much more historical context, then all of a sudden we see them talking like Republicans, talking like closed-minded people, and talking not even maybe Republicans, because not even Republicans are sometimes as corrupt. We see that mirrored back and forth between those two parties. And again, I'll reiterate, in Russia they voted for one person during the age of the USSR. We voted for two people. That doesn't make a democracy. That makes a puppet show, which is what we have now. I feel like the audience, when they watch Donald Trump, I'm sure they see a caricature. They don't see a person. When they look at Hillary, they say, this can't be serious. They feel like their intelligence is being insulted. It's finally time for some sensible conversations. And they're not going to be easy discussions to have, because I always tell people, if we want other individuals to acknowledge their white privilege, then across the board, what we need to do is acknowledge our male privilege. That's going to be difficult to do.
Absolutely.
Have conversations about sexism and rape culture,
Yeah.
which I don't see anybody on the Democratic or Republican ticket having. And I have heard those discussions happen openly in the Green Party.
Absolutely. Ajamu, we're winding down here, but we want to give you an opportunity to tell us a little more about your plans. And as the campaign winds down here, we understand this is an ongoing struggle. But what would you say about some of the things that Tech is talking about that needs to be exposed? And the Green Party is this honest broker. This is so desperately needed.
I've known about this brother. I've heard how deep and heavy he is. But I can say after this conversation, this brother is crystal clear, and it will be an honor, and for him to continue to provide support to this effort. We need every voice out there, and his is a critical one. This campaign is now winding down. We are sprinting to the finish line. We have less than 60 days, and we're taking our message to the people across this country. In fact, we'll be back up in New York mid-October. We have activities. I'm jumping on a plane tomorrow, going to after I do this thing this evening at Morgan State here in Baltimore. We're going to Wisconsin tomorrow. Then we're coming back to Baltimore. We got a big rally here. We head up next week to I think D.C. and back down south, and we're taking it every place because this is in fact is a critical year. People are looking for some different kinds of answers. People are beginning to overcome their fear and understand they have to vote their principles, and that they understand also too, coming to that understanding that it's not just about voting, it's about participating. We've got to build a real movement, and it means everybody has to have hands on deck. So, we're going to continue, and we're going to continue past even November 8th, because we understand that this is, in fact, a protracted struggle. And we know we got the momentum with us. Even though they might try to keep us out of the debates, we're going to take our message to as many people as we can. And, despite what happens on November the 8th, we are going to be winners, because there is something around the corner that some of us with vision can see. Politics as usual in this country is over with. It really is. And we're going to be part of that change taking place here in this country.
Absolutely. And this show, The Radical Imagination, will be part of that struggle and ongoing struggle as well. And we hope very much that you'll come join us in person, Ajamu, perhaps in mid-October. And perhaps, Felipe, you'll be in town. And hopefully, maybe we can even have Cornel West and some other people, and we'll carry on the struggle. I thank you both so very, very much for your passion, your intelligence, and your drive, and your idealism. It's so desperately needed. And I want to thank you all for viewing us this week on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos, your host. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.
Thank you.